Hello and welcome. Settle in and let the world outside fall away. Tonight we're going to talk about something simple, something wholesome, something that sits at the very heart of Western civilization. We're going to talk about bread. Think about it. The smell of a freshly baked loaf, warm and inviting. The satisfying crackle of a perfect crust as you slice into it. The soft, pillowy interior, ready for butter or jam. For thousands of years, bread has been more than just food. It's been the staff of life. It's a symbol of community, of home, of sustenance. The act of breaking bread with someone is a universal gesture of peace and fellowship. It is built on a foundation of implicit trust. You trust the baker who made it, the miller who ground the flour, the farmer who grew the grain, the earth that nourished it. You trust that this simple daily act of eating will sustain you, not harm you. But what if that trust was violated in the most horrific way imaginable? What if the daily bread, the very symbol of life and community, became a vessel for madness? Imagine a small, peaceful town, nestled in the sun-drenched heart of southern France. A town where everyone knows everyone. A town where life moves at a gentle, predictable pace, dictated by the seasons and the slow-moving river. Now imagine that town, over the course of a single terrifying week, descending into a collective nightmare. Imagine its citizens suddenly seized by terrifying hallucinations. People throwing themselves from windows, convinced they are airplanes made of lead. Children seeing flames erupt from their own bodies. Men and women screaming in the streets, fighting invisible dragons and demons, their minds ripped apart by a terrifying unseen force. This isn't a folk tale. This isn't the plot of a horror movie. This is the true story of what happened in the beautiful French town of Pont-Saint-Esprit in the summer of 1951. It's a story about a mysterious illness that caused mass insanity, institutionalization, and death. A story that for decades was explained away as a tragic but natural accident. But what if it wasn't an accident? What if the madness that gripped this town was not an act of God or a freak of nature, but an act of man? What if this idyllic little town was an unwitting laboratory, a human testing ground for one of the most terrifying weapons ever conceived, a mind-control drug? What if the citizens of Pont-Saint-Esprit were the first collateral damage in a secret war for the human mind, orchestrated by the world's most powerful intelligence agency? This is the story of the Pont-Saint-Esprit cursed bread. A story that begins as a medical mystery, a classic case of food poisoning, but soon spirals into the murky depths of Cold War paranoia, secret government programs, and a chilling conspiracy theory that is disturbingly plausible. It is a story that forces us to ask a terrifying question. What really happened in the town of the damned? And was it a tragic accident? Or was it a dress rehearsal for one of the most notorious government experiments of all time, Project MKUltra? To understand the events of that terrible August, we must first travel back in time, not just to 1951, but to the world that created it. The early 1950s were a time of deep and pervasive fear. The Second World War had ended just 6 years prior, but the peace was a fragile, anxious one. The world had been cleaved in two, divided by what Winston Churchill had famously called the Iron Curtain. On one side, the capitalist West, led by the United States. On the other, the communist East, led by the Soviet Union. The Cold War was not a war of open battle between superpowers, but a war of shadows and whispers, of espionage, propaganda, and a terrifying technological arms race that held the entire planet hostage. Just a few years earlier, the world had witnessed the horrifying power of the atomic bomb at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now both sides were frantically developing even more powerful hydrogen bombs, capable of annihilating entire cities in a single blinding flash of light. But the fear was not just of nuclear war. It was a war for ideology, for hearts and minds. And in this new kind of war, a new kind of weapon was being sought after with feverish desperation. Intelligence agencies on both sides were obsessed with the idea of brainwashing and mind control. The Korean War was raging and shocking stories were emerging of American prisoners of war who had been turned by their communist captors. These soldiers were appearing in propaganda films, publicly denouncing their own country and confessing to war crimes they hadn't committed. The West was terrified. Could the Soviets really control a person's mind? Could they create a Manchurian candidate, an unwitting assassin program to kill on command? The CIA, America's fledgling intelligence agency, was desperate to find out. They needed to know if mind control was possible, and if it was, they needed to master it first. This obsession gave birth to a series of highly secret and highly illegal research programs. These programs had innocuous-sounding names like Project Bluebird and Project Artichoke, but their goals were anything but. They aimed to find the ultimate truth drug, a way to control human consciousness, to erase memory, to create new identities. The most famous and far-reaching of these would be Project MKUltra, officially sanctioned in 1953. Under its umbrella, the CIA experimented with hypnosis, sensory deprivation, psychological torture, and a whole arsenal of chemical agents. And their drug of choice, the substance they believed held the key to unlocking and controlling the mind, was a new and incredibly potent hallucinogen, lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD. This is the backdrop. A world gripped by paranoia, a secret war being fought in the shadows, and a desperate search by amoral men for a chemical key that could unlock the human soul. Now, with that chilling context in mind, let's travel to our quiet little town in the south of France. A town that was about to be plunged screaming into the very heart of this nightmare. Pont-Saint-Esprit in the summer of 1951 was a postcard from a forgotten time. It is a charming, ancient town on the western bank of the mighty Rhône River, in the Gard department of southern France. Its name, which translates to Bridge of the Holy Spirit, comes from a magnificent 13th-century stone bridge with 20 arches that spans the Riviera marvel of medieval engineering. In 1951, it was a town of narrow, winding streets, of stone houses with sun-baked terracotta roofs, of leafy plane trees offering cool shade in the town squares. Life here was slow, traditional, and deeply connected to the cycles of the land. Most of its 4,500 residents were farmers who tended the region's famous vineyards and orchards, local shopkeepers and artisans whose families had practiced their trades for generations. The summer of 1951 had been long and exceptionally hot. The grape harvest was just a few weeks away. The mood in the town was one of sleepy, sun-drenched contentment. People went about their daily routines as they always had. And one of those routines, the most fundamental of all, was the morning trip to the boulangerie, the bakery, to fetch the day's bread. In France, perhaps more than anywhere else, the local baker is a pillar of the community. He is not just a merchant. He is a craftsman, an essential part of the town's social fabric. And in Pont-Saint-Esprit, one of the most respected bakers was a man named Roch Briand. His bakery, on the Rue de la Petite Juiverie, was known for producing some of the best bread in town. Every morning, the townspeople would line up to buy his loaves, still warm and fragrant from the wood-fired oven. On the evening of Thursday, August 16th, something terrible and unseen entered the lifeblood of the town through Briand's bread. The nightmare began. It started subtly, insidiously. A few people, scattered across town, began to complain of stomach cramps, a burning sensation like a hot coal in their gut, nausea followed by vomiting. The local doctor, a Dr. Gabai, was called. He, along with his colleagues, initially assumed it was a simple, if widespread, case of food poisoning. Perhaps some bad fish at the market or tainted meat. He prescribed some basic remedies and told his patients to rest and drink plenty of fluids. But by the next day, Friday, August 17th, it was clear this was no ordinary stomach bug. The number of sick people had exploded. Dozens more were falling ill, all with the same initial symptoms. The town's 3 doctors were run off their feet, going from house to house. The symptoms were escalating in severity. The initial gastric distress was now accompanied by prolonged bouts of insomnia, cold chills that made people shiver despite the summer heat, and a profound bone-deep weakness. But then, a new and deeply terrifying set of symptoms began to appear, something the doctors had no frame of reference for. The patients were becoming delirious. They were being gripped by vivid, terrifying hallucinations. The medical mystery was rapidly turning into a public health crisis. By Saturday, August 18th, the town had descended into madness. The small local hospital was completely overwhelmed. Its corridors were filled with people screaming, thrashing against their beds, and weeping inconsolably. One man, a 40-year-old farm worker named Gabriel Valadier, was convinced his stomach was being eaten by snakes. In a lucid moment he told his wife, "I know you're trying to help me, but I am lost." He then ran from his house and threw himself into the Rhone River, trying to drown the serpents inside him. He was rescued, but his psychosis continued. Another man, Léon Armenier, a normally placid and respectable 50-year-old, leaped from the second-story window of his house, shouting to his horrified wife and neighbors, "I am an airplane." He landed on the pavement below, breaking both of his legs, but miraculously survived, only to continue screaming for hours that he could fly, his mind soaring while his body lay broken. A young girl, barely a teenager, was convinced she was being attacked by tigers. She clawed at her own terrified parents, fighting for her life against beasts only she could see. A factory worker was found in his workshop, babbling that red flowers were blooming from his body, and that his head had turned to lead. People ran through the streets, chased by invisible demons. They saw flames, they heard accusatory voices, their deepest fears made manifest. One man tried to stuff his heart back into his chest. The town was in the grip of a collective psychosis. The screams of the mad, once confined to the local asylum, now echoed through the ancient stone streets day and night. The local doctors were completely out of their depth. They had never seen anything like it. They called for help from regional health authorities in Nîmes and Montpellier. The local asylum was filled to capacity, its staff struggling to restrain patients with straitjackets and sedatives that seemed to have little effect against the chemical storm raging in their brains. In total, over 300 people fell ill. Around 50 were committed to asylums, some for months, some forever. And tragically, 7 people died. One man died of a heart attack while being restrained in a straitjacket. Others succumbed to the sheer physical and mental exhaustion of their ordeal, their bodies giving out after days of manic terror. The town of Pont-Saint-Esprit was living up to its new grim nickname. One whispered in the national press, "Le pain maudit," the cursed bread, because investigators, both medical and police, quickly traced the source of the madness to a single terrifying point of origin: the bread from Roch Brian's bakery. A quick survey showed that every single person who had fallen ill had eaten his bread on August 16th. The question that now hung over the terrified town was, what was in it? What terrible contaminant could cause not just sickness and death, but full-blown terrifying insanity? The official investigation began immediately. The police sealed the bakery a crime scene. Samples of the remaining flour, water, and even the yeast were collected and sent to laboratories in Marseille and Paris for analysis. Roch Brian himself was distraught, his reputation ruined, unable to comprehend how his bread, his life's work, could have become a vessel for such horror. The initial theory was chemical poisoning. In the post-war era, new and powerful chemicals were being used in agriculture. Had some mercury-based fungicide, used to treat the grain seeds, accidentally found its way into the final flour? It was a plausible theory. But when the lab results came back, they were ambiguous. They found some organic mercury compounds, but not nearly in high enough concentrations to explain the intensity and, crucially, the profoundly hallucinatory nature of the symptoms. This wasn't just poisoning. It was a mass psychedelic event. And then, the scientists at the Pasteur Institute in Paris found it. Deep within the samples of flour, they discovered traces of a fungus, a microscopic parasitic fungus that grows on rye and other grains, especially in damp weather. Its scientific name is Claviceps purpurea, but it's better known by its common, more ominous name, ergot. With the discovery of ergot, the medical mystery seemed to be solved. The official explanation, the one that has been in the history books for over 70 years, is that the cursed bread of Pont Saint-Esprit was the result of a tragic, accidental case of ergot poisoning. Ergotism, also known historically as St. Anthony's fire, is a horrifying condition with a long and terrible history in Europe. In the Middle Ages, before people understood its cause, it was responsible for devastating plagues that could wipe out entire villages. Ergot contains a cocktail of potent, toxic alkaloids, which can cause two main syndromes. The first is gangrenous ergotism. This is caused by alkaloids that are powerful vasoconstrictors, meaning they severely restrict blood flow. It causes an intense, fiery burning sensation in the limbs, hence the name St. Anthony's fire, followed by edema, and then dry gangrene causing fingers, toes, and even entire limbs to wither, turn black and brittle like charcoal, and fall off. The second is convulsive ergotism, and this is where the story gets chillingly familiar. This form is caused by a different set of alkaloids that attack the central nervous system. Its symptoms include agonizingly painful muscle spasms, violent convulsions, and most importantly, vivid, terrifying hallucinations, mania, and psychosis. Historians now believe that many of the so-called demonic possessions and bewitchment episodes of the past, including possibly the Salem witch trials of 1692, were actually outbreaks of convulsive ergotism. The afflicted were not possessed by the devil, they were poisoned by their daily bread. The symptoms described in medieval chronicles of St. Anthony's fire match the madness of Pont Saint-Esprit almost perfectly. The hallucinations of burning, the feeling of being eaten by snakes or attacked by beasts, the manic energy, the psychosis, it was all there. So the case seemed closed. The narrative was simple and plausible. An unscrupulous miller, a man named Maurice Maillet, had likely mixed some cheap, ergot-contaminated rye flour in with the good white wheat flour he sold to the baker, Roch Briand, to increase his profits. Briand, completely unaware, had baked this poisoned flour into his bread, and the town had eaten it, unwittingly unleashing a medieval plague in the modern world. It was a tragic, horrifying accident born of greed. A neat, tidy explanation. Maillet was charged, though the charges were later dropped for lack of evidence. The French government accepted the ergot theory. The world moved on. But there were problems with this theory. Nagging questions. Inconsistencies that gnawed at the edges of the official story for decades, leaving a sliver of doubt that would eventually be pried wide open. For one, ergotism from bread was incredibly rare in 20th century Europe. Modern grain cleaning and milling techniques had all but eliminated the fungus from the food supply. For an outbreak of this magnitude to occur, there would have to have been a massive, almost deliberate level of contamination. Secondly, the symptoms, while similar, didn't perfectly match. While there were rampant hallucinations and psychosis, there were very few reports of the classic gangrenous symptoms, the blackening limbs, or the violent, full-body convulsions typical of historical ergotism. The primary effects seemed to be purely psychoactive, a targeted assault on the mind, rather than a systemic poisoning of the whole body. And thirdly, and perhaps most damningly for the ergot theory, there was the problem of the oven. Ergot is a notoriously unstable fungus. The psychoactive alkaloids it contains, which are precursors to LSD, break down easily when exposed to high heat. The intense temperatures of a baker's wood-fired oven, often over 200 degrees Celsius or 400 degrees Fahrenheit, should have destroyed most, if not all, of the toxic compounds. It seems scientifically unlikely that enough could have survived the baking process to poison over 300 people so severely. These inconsistencies left the door open for another, far more sinister explanation. an explanation that lay dormant in the shadows for half a century, until a shocking discovery in the CIA's own secret files. In 2009, an American investigative journalist named H.P. Albarelli Jr. published a meticulously researched, 800-page book titled A Terrible Mistake. The book was centered on the mysterious 1953 death of a U.S. Army biochemist and CIA employee named Frank Olson. For decades, Olson's death, a fall from the 13th-story window of a New York hotel, was ruled a suicide. But in the 1970s, under pressure from the Church Committee investigations into CIA abuses, the agency was forced to admit a horrifying truth. Just 9 days before his death, Olson had been secretly dosed with LSD by his CIA colleagues as part of Project MKUltra. While digging through thousands of declassified CIA documents related to the Olson case, Albarelli stumbled upon something extraordinary. He found a set of notes from a 1954 conversation between a CIA agent and a scientist from the Sandoz Chemical Company in Basel, Switzerland. Sandoz was the company where Dr. Albert Hofmann had first synthesized LSD in 1938 and discovered its hallucinogenic properties in 1943. And it was the CIA's primary and initially sole supplier of the drug for their MKUltra experiments. The document was a smoking gun. In it, the Sandoz scientist, whose name was redacted, explicitly mentions the incident in France. He tells the CIA agent that the secret of Pont Saint-Esprit was not ergot at all. He claimed the madness was caused by diethylamideth D in LSD. Albarelli had found the missing link. He began to piece together a new, terrifying timeline. His theory, laid out in his book, was this: the Pont Saint-Esprit incident was not an accident. It was a field test, a secret joint experiment conducted by the U.S. Army's Special Operations Division (SOD) at Fort Detrick and the CIA, to see what would happen if an entire population was covertly dosed with a powerful hallucinogenic drug. The motive was clear. This was the height of the Cold War. The CIA was obsessed with finding a mind control weapon and an incapacitating agent that could be used on enemy troops or populations. What better way to test the effects of a mass psychotropic event than to secretly contaminate an unsuspecting town's food supply and watch what happened from a safe distance? The location was perfect. Pont Saint-Esprit was a small, relatively isolated town. It was far from the prying eyes of the major press in Paris, and post-war France, as a key NATO ally and the recipient of Marshall Plan aid, was a place where the American military and intelligence services could operate with a degree of freedom and secrecy. The method was ingenious. Why use an aerosol spray which could be detected and might dissipate unpredictably, when you could contaminate the one thing the entire town ate every single day? The bread. Albarelli's research unearthed even more circumstantial evidence. He discovered that the U.S. Army Special Operations Division, based at the biological warfare hub of Fort Detrick, had set up a secret chemical warfare laboratory not far from Pont Saint-Esprit. He also found documents showing that the Sandoz Company was working closely with both the U.S. Army and the CIA at the time, providing them with chemical compounds for testing. Albarelli even interviewed former intelligence agents who, speaking off the record, confirmed that Pont Saint-Esprit was part of a series of mind control experiments. According to this chilling theory, CIA or Army operatives covertly contaminated the flour at Maillet's mill, or perhaps even the bread at Brian's bakery itself, not with unstable, unpredictable ergot, but with pure synthesized LSD, or a similar psychoactive compound developed at Fort Detrick. The initial story of ergot poisoning was the perfect cover. It was plausible enough to be believed, especially with the discovery of some trace amounts of the fungus, and it sent any other investigators down the wrong path for 50 years. The CIA conspiracy theory reframes the entire event. Suddenly, the nagging inconsistencies in the ergot theory make perfect sense. The lack of classic ergotism symptoms like gangrene or convulsions. Of course, it wasn't ergot. The purely mental, hallucinatory nature of the affliction? LSD is a targeted psychoactive drug. It attacks the mind, not the limbs. The fact that the poison survived the baking process? LSD is significantly more heat-stable than the natural alkaloids in ergot. The victims of Pont Saint-Esprit were no longer the casualties of a random, medieval plague. They were human guinea pigs. Their suffering, their madness, their deaths, it was all just data, collected and analyzed by men in a secret laboratory. The screams in the streets of the French town were the first horrifying echoes of Project MKUltra. So, which story is true? Do we believe the official explanation, a tragic but natural case of ergot poisoning? Or do we believe the darker, more conspiratorial version, a secret CIA experiment run amok? The truth is, we may never know for certain. The CIA is not in the habit of confirming its most sinister operations. Most of the key players from that era are long dead. The paper trail is murky, and we know for a fact that the CIA director in 1973, Richard Helms, deliberately ordered the destruction of most of the MKUltra documentation to hide it from congressional investigators. What we are left with are shadows, redacted documents, and whispers. But the CIA conspiracy theory, once you hear it, once you understand the context of the time, is hard to dismiss. It fits the facts in some ways even better than the official story. And it fits perfectly with what we now know for a fact about the CIA's activities during the Cold War. We know that Project MKUltra was real. We know that the CIA dosed hundreds of unwitting American citizens with LSD in hospitals, prisons, and CIA-run brothels set up for this very purpose. We know they were obsessed with mind control and were willing to break any law and any moral code to achieve it. Given what we know they did, is it really so hard to believe that they would take their experiments to the next level? That they would want to see what would happen if they poisoned not just an individual but an entire community? The story of the cursed bread of Pont Saint-Esprit leaves us dangling in a state of uncomfortable uncertainty. It is a story with two possible endings, and we are left to choose the one we find more plausible, or perhaps less terrifying. In one version, it is a tale of nature's terrible power, a random, horrifying fluke, a reminder that ancient plagues can re-emerge even in our modern world. In the other, it is a story of calculated human malevolence, of the terrifying lengths that governments will go to in the name of national security, and of the innocent people who become collateral damage in wars they don't even know are being fought. Perhaps the most frightening thing is that both stories are, in their own way, equally terrifying. One speaks to the fragility of our bodies in the face of the natural world. The other speaks to the fragility of our minds and our freedoms in the face of our own governments. Whatever the truth may be, the memory of that terrible week in August 1951 still haunts the town of Pont Saint-Esprit. The story is passed down through generations, a dark legend of a time when the daily bread brought not life, but madness and death. A chilling reminder that sometimes the most horrific stories are the ones that are true, and the most terrifying mysteries are the ones that may never be solved. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the heart of a dark and perplexing mystery. The story of the Pont Saint-Esprit cursed bread is a perfect storm of history, true crime, and conspiracy. A case where the truth may be forever out of reach, buried under decades of official denials and destroyed documents. If you found this exploration of ergot poisoning, the chilling possibility of a CIA conspiracy, and the dark history of Project MKUltra as fascinating and unsettling as I do, please consider supporting our channel. You can do that by leaving a like, subscribing, and hitting the notification bell, so you don't miss our next deep dive into the shadows of the past. But most of all, I want to hear your thoughts. What do you believe happened in Pont Saint-Esprit? Do you think it was a tragic, if unlikely, accident of nature? Or do you believe the evidence points to a deliberate, sinister CIA experiment? Let me know your theory and why you believe it in the comments below. We have many more stories to tell, from unsolved crimes to historical enigmas and urban legends that might just be true. Until then, stay curious, question the official story, and remember that history is often much stranger and much darker than we are led to believe.